Good morning, students. Welcome to the IGCSE online sessions. I'm Mr. Charles, and this is the fourth lesson of week number 7. Please go to your course book, page 184, The Shadow Menser by J.P. Taylor, a British writer. Let's read together. In the gloom of the forest, her eyes began to make strange shapes out of everything she looked at. A tree appeared to change into a giant's head. A cloud looked like a swan fixed against a star, and a small tuft of grass took on the shape of a hedgehog that seemed to crawl through the wood. Kate stared into the night, then froze. The night was staring back at her. There in the glade, just several feet away from her, 5 pairs of bright eyes were gazing towards the holy bush. Kate felt the palms of her hand begin to sweat as sudden panic gripped her tightly. She dared not move for fear that they would see her. She dared not swallow for fear that they would hear her. Even at such close a distance, she could not make out any shape of the creatures, just red, staring eyes. If they were smugglers, then this was the best disguise she had ever seen. She had certainly not heard their arrival. They had simply appeared. As she looked on, Kate saw a silver outline begin to appear around each figure, like millions of tiny sparks jumping in a fire. Brighter and brighter they glowed. Then all the sparks began to draw closer to her, closer together. They rolled around each other as if propelled by some unseen wind blasting the embers of a fire. As they burned brighter, they changed from silver to red to green to blue. Finally, as quickly as they appeared, they vanished. Kate stared fearfully into the night. Her gaze was transfixed by what was before her. There, standing in the glade, were 5 tall figures, dressed from head to foot in metal armor. Each wore a burnished helmet in the shape of a snake's head, with glistening eyes that shone like diamonds. 2 large ivory fangs stabbed down to the front of each helmet, like the saber teeth of some long extinct creature. The breastplates of the armor outlined every muscle. A long metal spine ran to the elbow of each arm, where it was joined to a thick leather gauntlet. In between each piece of metal, Kate could see the skin of the creatures, dark green and lifeless. It had an eerie glow that almost merged with the night. Around each waist hung a thick black leather belt, onto which was strapped what looked like a short sword with a black leather grip. The smallest of the creatures carried a round shield studded with silver, inset with glowing red jewels. From her hiding place, she could not make out the features of their faces. She could see only the bright red eyes still staring towards her. Kate aimed the pistol directly at the head of the largest creature. She took in a slow and silent breath. She was terrified. A voice inside her screamed, "Pull the trigger." She was unable to move, rigid with fear, petrified as a statue. The voice screamed at her again, "Pull the trigger." Again she could not move. The weight of the gun began to tug against her hand as if it was being pulled over her grip. All Kate wanted to do was run and scream. She knew she would get only 5 paces before being caught. She knew that if she moved her hand or lowered the pistol, the creatures would hear her. Kate summoned every ounce of strength to hold the pistol in front of her. She could feel the muscles in her arm begin to ache, the pain reaching from the tips of her fingers to the shoulders. She wanted to cry. She wanted to go home. Again the voice cried in her head, "Pull the trigger, pull the trigger." Now trembling with fear, Kate tried to squeeze the trigger, but her finger would not move. A numbing coldness began to claw its way up her arm as if she was being slowly turned to stone. Question on page 184 requires you to write a narrative composition, and it says write another exciting scene for the story above, continuing from the words "a numbing coldness began to claw its way up her arm as if she was being slowly turned to stone." No need to write 350 words, write between 258 to 300. And before you start, we might as well review the elements of the Shadowmancer in terms of what are the features of this narrative. Is it solely narrative or is it a narrative descriptive? What are its elements? First of all, it is told in the narrator, a third person point of view, the omniscient narrator, the narrator that knows all and is everywhere at the same time. The character, Kate, is not aware of what the creature is, but the narrator is aware. The narrator is narrating that Kate is not aware. Imagine the narrator being on top and can see the forest from all of its angles from the sky and can see what creature is closing to Kate, but it is describing the creature as how she would perceive it. So this is the third person point of view, the omniscient narrator is for you to write in. The second point to consider, which the writer Taylor considered himself, is the use of figurative language. And this is an attribute for descriptive writing. There were a lot of similes, metaphors, personifications, etc. A lot of the figurative language to contribute to the creation of images, which is a very important element in the descriptive writing. The third detail that also belongs to the descriptive writing is the sensual details. There are a lot of details related to the senses, to the 5 senses, and this also to make the reader experience the story rather than just read it. There are a lot of short sentences, simple sentence structures, this to denote fear. We previously talked about short sentences or simple sentence structures, and these are, we tell you again, these are to emphasize strong emotions or to persuade. In our case, it's not to persuade. This is descriptive narrative. But this denotes strong emotions in terms of fear, confusion, or a childlike style. This is not a child. Taylor is no child. And there is confusion and fear. That's why there are short sentences. Imagine that you are afraid. You will not have time. You will not have the strength, the energy to come up with complex sentences, long, sophisticated sentences. That's why short sentence structures are used in such cases. There is description of strange shapes, and this is done to increase anticipation. The creature could have been described more clearly. The creature could have been identified, not left to speculations like the writer did. Leaving an element to speculations, as we said yesterday, increases the element of surprise, increases the element of anticipation and fear. And that's what the narrator wanted in this setting, just like in the Lord of the Rings forest scene. We could see as well in the text, and for you to include in your continuation, effects of fear. This falls a little bit under the category of sensual details, but it is the effects of the building of fear and anticipation. We see her sweating, Kate. We see her feeling faint. We see her wanting to go back, running to her house. We see her hand trembling and almost dropping the pistol. All of these are sensual effects of the fear. Also, to increase the level of involvement of the reader as an experience rather than just a story. There is not much of presence for the chronological order. As you can see, it's one scene, it didn't move, and it's only in the forest, and it's only descriptive. There's barely enough details about chronological order, about the order of time. There's no moving from one event to another, let's say far away in time. There's no moving event from one day to another or from one year to another. All of these are chronologically ordered events. In our case, there's no chronological order. That's what also adds description to the descriptive piece. How to summarize successfully on page 186. There are elements of summary. So far, every unit, or almost every other unit, repeats them because the summary question is very important in the IGCSE exam. So if you haven't grasped thoroughly how to summarize successfully, pay extra attention for these points. First, keyword the question, which means break down the question into its requirements. What does the question want from you? What are the details the question is asking of you to summarize? The question would definitely not just say summarize the story on page X or summarize the events on page Y. Even the word events is a little more detailed than the word story, right? And then the events in the evening are more, or this phrase, events in the evening, is more detailed. And then events in the evening that preceded, for example, the murder, this is very much specific. And that's how questions would come. So, keyword, underline the elements in the question that you have to focus on. Reread the text and underline the elements that you sought, that you are seeking. Annotate these details on the margin. For example, after you underline them, to the margin write this is detail number A, or letter A, detail letter B, detail letter C, and so on. So when you look at the summary, it becomes a parts or chunks of underlined statements with letters or numbers to the margin to the left. Once you have done that, you can start writing while you connect your ideas. So you have chunks, you have statements that are not really connected. Now you can use your connecting devices, subordinate conjunctions, fanboys, whatever you choose, depending on the elements of the summary, on how sophisticated you want it. But the more you use subordinated conjunctions to create complex sentences, like however, therefore, nonetheless, even though, and so on, so many complex devices. The more you use these, the better your summary is. This is a very important detail. Also count your words while you're summarizing, or at least at the end of your summary. Do not exceed the limit. For example, if they require a few 100 words, do not exceed 100 words. And do not go less than, let's say, 80 words or 85 words. If you're less than 85, know that there's something missing. You missed some details you did not mention, or at least you did not expand on them enough. And if you go above 100, you risk losing some marks and expanding a little too much on some ideas. Chop down your summary, try to fit the limit of the question. The final point, most important point, is for you to proofread. Be the teacher, be the marker. How much would you give this summary? How much does it really relate to the question, relate to the text, and relate to good English, to good use of English? How much grammatically correct, or how grammatically correct is your piece? You should ask yourself. The assignment for tomorrow, there are 3 summarized pieces on page 186. They belong to a text on the elephant, Ning Nong, I think its name was, that saved a girl's life from a tsunami. And the text dates back on pages 164 and 165. So summarize that text in less than 120 words and see the summaries on page 186. Rate them. Tell us which summary requires which improvements. What do you think we should improve in each summary regarding content and grammar? And which would you rate as the best? Which would you choose as the best summary? We're done for today. Thank you very much for listening. Stay safe and keep up the good work.